Dr. Maya Rodriguez was having what she'd generously call a spectacularly bad day. One moment she'd been cataloging samples in Research Station Echo 7, humming off-key to some ancient Earth pop song, and the next moment she was being dragged through corridors by what looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a really angry crocodile. "You know," Maya said, her voice echoing in the alien ship's metallic corridors, "when I signed up for xenobiology, the recruitment poster definitely didn't mention getting kidnapped by discount dinosaurs." The creature hauling her along, she'd mentally dubbed a Mantis Mike, clicked his mandibles in what she assumed was either laughter or hunger. Hard to tell with aliens. They always seem to have resting murder face. "Silence, soft flesh," Mantis Mike hissed, his translator doing that weird robotic thing that made every alien sound like they were gargling gravel. "You will speak when Commander Vexitar permits it." "Oh, Commander Vexitar," Maya repeated, rolling her eyes. "Let me guess, he's got a really dramatic cape and probably collects the skulls of his enemies. You guys always have the most wonderfully predictable naming conventions." They dragged her into what was obviously the ship's main hall, and Maya had to admit it was impressive in a deeply disturbing way. The walls were lined with trophies from a dozen different species, some she recognized from her xenobiology textbooks, others that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of nightmares. And there, seated on what could only be described as a throne made from the bones of something very large and very dead, was Commander Vexitar himself. He was bigger than Mantis Mike, with scales that shifted from deep purple to black depending on the light, and eyes that glowed like amber coals. "Ah," Vexitar said, his voice a rumbling purr that probably sounded terrifying to most species. "The human specimen awakens." Maya looked around the room at the assembled Krellian hunting party. They were all staring at her with the kind of predatory interest that she'd seen in nature documentaries, right before something small and furry became lunch. "Specimen," Maya raised an eyebrow. "That's adorable. I haven't been called a specimen since my last medical exam, and trust me, that doctor had way better bedside manner than you guys." The assembled aliens made that clicking sound again, and Maya realized they were laughing, actually laughing at her, like she was some kind of amusing pet that had just done a trick. "Look at this tiny creature," one of them said, a slightly smaller Krellian with what looked like ritual scarring across his snout. "It thinks it can speak to us as equals." "How delightfully brave," Vexitar said, leaning forward on his bone throne. "Tell me, little human, do you know what we are?" Maya pretended to think about it, tapping her chin with one finger. "Well, based on the whole dramatic throne room decorated with dead things aesthetic, I'd say you're either the galaxy's most successful interior decorators, or you're the Krellian hunting fleet that's been terrorizing the outer colonies for the past few years. We are the apex predators of this galaxy," Vexitar declared, spreading his arms wide. "We have conquered 17 star systems, and brought extinction to 43 species. We are death incarnate, and you." He pointed one razor-sharp claw at Maya. "You are prey." The other Krellians made appreciative growling sounds, like they were at a really violent poetry reading. Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That's a really impressive resume. Very intimidating. I'm sure you've got the whole fear me, for I am death thing down to a science." She paused, looking around the room with the kind of expression someone might wear when examining a particularly interesting bug. "But here's the thing," Maya continued, her voice taking on a conversational tone that somehow made the room feel a few degrees colder. "You said you're apex predators, and I'm sure that's true, in your own little corner of the galaxy. But you made one tiny mistake." Vexitar's eyes narrowed. "And what mistake would that be?" "Prey." Maya smiled, and for just a moment something flickered in her eyes that made a few of the smaller Krellians take an involuntary step backward. "You assumed I was prey," she said simply. "But see, that's where you're wrong. You might be predators, but we humans, we're apex predators. And there's a very important difference between the two." The laughter that followed was loud and harsh, filling the trophy-lined chamber with the sound of a dozen deadly creatures being thoroughly amused by what they clearly considered the desperate bluffing of cornered prey. Maya just kept smiling, because she knew something they didn't. Humans were very, very good at surprises. 2 hours later, Maya found herself in what the Krellians laughingly called their interrogation chamber, which was really just another trophy room with better lighting and some seriously uncomfortable chairs. She was seated across from Chief Interrogator Zalmoth, who looked like someone had crossed a velociraptor with a tax auditor and given the result a really bad attitude. "So," Zalmoth said, consulting what looked like a datapad made from some poor creature's shell, "Dr. Maya Rodriguez. Xenobiologist. Age 28. No combat training, no military service, no augmentations or genetic modifications. You forgot devastatingly charming and modest to a fault," Maya added helpfully. Zalmoth ignored her. "You were alone on Research Station Echo 7, conducting what your records indicate was a routine survey of local flora and fauna. Hardly the profile of a dangerous adversary. Captain Nexric, who was leaning against the wall trying to look intimidating, snorted with amusement. Look at it, Zalmoth. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor. Its skin is so thin you can practically see through it. How did such a pathetic species ever survive long enough to develop space travel? Right, Maya said, holding up her hands and wiggling her fingers. I mean, look at these things. No claws at all, and don't even get me started on our teeth. Completely useless for tearing flesh. It's honestly embarrassing. The three Krellians in the room exchanged glances that clearly said they were wondering if their captive was having some kind of mental breakdown. You seem remarkably calm for someone in your situation, Zalmoth observed, his head tilting in that way that predators do when they're trying to figure out why their prey isn't running. Well, Maya said, settling back in her uncomfortable chair. I figure panic is probably what you're expecting, right? Lots of screaming and begging and carrying on. But honestly, that seems like a waste of energy. Energy you will need for the hunt, Captain Nexric said with obvious relish. Commander Vextar has decided that you will be released on the hunting moon of Kethvar. You will have a 6-hour head start before we begin pursuit. Oh, a hunting moon. How wonderfully original. Maya nodded approvingly. Let me guess. It's got lots of dangerous wildlife, treacherous terrain, and probably some kind of atmospheric condition that makes it extra challenging for prey species. The gravity is twice your Earth normal, Zalmoth said, clearly enjoying himself. The atmosphere has a slight toxicity that will slowly weaken you over time. And yes, the indigenous predators are quite formidable. Sounds like a vacation compared to where I grew up, Maya said cheerfully. You guys ever been to Detroit? The joke was completely lost on them, which Maya had expected, but their confused expressions were worth it anyway. Your bravado is amusing, human. Vextar's voice rumbled from the chamber's entrance as the commander himself stalked in. But it will not save you. We have hunted prey across 1,000 worlds. We know fear when we see it, and you. He leaned down until his massive head was level with hers. You are afraid. Maya looked him straight in those glowing amber eyes. You're absolutely right, she said. I am afraid. But not of you. This caught their attention. Zalmoth's head snapped up from his datapad, and Captain Nexric pushed himself off the wall. Then what do you fear, little prey? Vextar asked, genuinely curious now. Maya was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its humor. I'm afraid of what my species is going to do to yours when they find out you took me. The silence that followed was broken by Captain Nexric's laughter. Your species, the soft, weak humans, what could they possibly do to the mighty Krellian fleet? Maya looked at him with something that might have been pity. Oh Captain, you really don't understand what humans are, do you? You see the soft skin and the lack of natural weapons, and you think that makes us weak. But you're missing the most important part. And what part is that? Zalmoth asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring her. The part where we're the only species in the galaxy that evolved from pursued predators, Maya said simply. The part where we're not just survivors, we're the thing that everything else on our planet learned to be afraid of. Vextar straightened up, his expression shifting from amusement to something that might have been the beginning of interest. But please, Maya continued, her smile returning, don't let me spoil the surprise. I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually. The interrogation chamber fell silent, except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Maya could practically hear the gears turning in their reptilian heads as they tried to process what she'd just said. Pursuit predators, Zalmoth repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words. You mean you chase down your prey instead of ambushing them? Oh, we're so much more interesting than that, Maya said, leaning forward in her chair with the enthusiasm of someone about to deliver a really good lecture. See, most predators in the galaxy are ambush hunters, right? They hide, they wait, they strike fast and hard. Very efficient, very smart. Captain Nexric nodded smugly. As we do. The Krellian way is to strike swiftly, and without warning. Exactly. And that works great for most prey species. Because most prey animals have one primary survival strategy. Maya held up a finger. Run fast, run far, and hope the predator gives up and goes looking for easier targets. A sensible strategy, Vextar rumbled, though his eyes never left Maya's face. Absolutely. Makes perfect evolutionary sense. Energy conservation is key to survival. Maya's smile grew wider. But here's where it gets interesting. What happens when you have a predator that doesn't give up? What happens when you have a predator that just keeps coming, no matter how far you run or how well you hide? The three Krellians exchanged glances, and Maya caught the first flicker of something that might have been unease. Humans didn't evolve claws or fangs or armor plating. Maya continued conversationally. We evolved something much, much worse. We evolved endurance. And patience. And the absolute, unwavering refusal to quit. She stood up from her chair, and interestingly, none of the Krellians moved to stop her. They were too busy listening. Picture this, Maya said, beginning to pace around the small chamber. You're an antelope on the African savanna. You're fast. You're agile. You can outrun almost anything for short distances. And then you see them coming. A small group of those weird hairless apes. They're not particularly fast. They don't look dangerous. So you run. Maya paused, looking at each of the aliens in turn. And they follow. Not sprinting. Not charging. Just jogging. Just keeping that steady, relentless pace. So you run faster. Put some distance between you and them. And when you stop to catch your breath, there they are again. Still coming. Still jogging. Captain Nexrick shifted uncomfortably. Surely any intelligent prey would simply keep running until the pursuit was abandoned. That's what you'd think, wouldn't you? Maya's voice took on an almost dreamy quality. But here's the beautiful, terrifying thing about persistence hunting. The prey always thinks they can outlast the predator. They always think that if they just run a little farther, hide a little better, the pursuit will end. She stopped pacing and faced them directly. But it never ends. Hours pass. The sun moves across the sky. The prey is exhausted, dehydrated, desperate. And still those hairless apes keep coming. Not fast, not flashy, just inevitable. Like death itself, but with better cardiovascular health. Zalmoth's datapad was forgotten in his hands. This seems inefficient. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Maya said, her tone brightening like she was discussing her favorite hobby. It's incredibly efficient, because once word gets out about what humans do to their prey, other animals start avoiding human territory entirely. We didn't just hunt animals into submission, we hunted them into evolutionary trauma. The silence stretched longer this time. But surely, Vextar said slowly, this persistence hunting would only work on unintelligent beasts. Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. You'd think so. But humans didn't stop evolving when we learned to hunt animals. We kept developing that pursuit instinct. We refined it. We applied it to everything. She began counting on her fingers. We persistence hunted the Neanderthals into extinction. We persistence hunted our way across 6 continents and dozens of hostile environments. We persistence hunted our way through ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and every single ecological niche on our planet, until we were the only apex predator left standing. Captain Nexrick's mandibles clicked nervously. But that was just animals. Primitive survival. Maya's smile became something that would have looked perfectly at home on a shark. Captain, we persistence hunted our way to the stars. And the thing about persistence hunting is that it gets easier with practice. Much easier. Especially when you're hunting something that thinks it's safe because it's bigger, stronger and more dangerous than you are. For the first time since Maya had been brought aboard their ship, none of the Krellians were laughing. The temperature in the interrogation chamber seemed to drop several degrees as Maya continued her impromptu lecture on human evolution. The 3 Krellians were no longer looking at her like she was amusing prey. They were looking at her the way someone might look at a ticking bomb. You know what's really fascinating about humans? Maya said, settling back into her chair like she was getting comfortable for a long story. We're the only species that figured out how to make extinction an art form. Zalmoth's claws tapped nervously against his datapad. What do you mean by that? Well, let's talk about our track record, shall we? Maya's tone was now positively cheerful, which somehow made her words more disturbing. In the time it took us to develop from hunter-gatherers to spacefaring civilization, we managed to drive to extinction roughly 68% of all large animal species on our planet. Captain Nexrick's mandibles clicked. Through hunting? Oh, hunting was just the beginning, Maya said with a wave of her hand. We also did it through habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, and just general existential inconvenience. We were very thorough. We even managed to kill off most of the other human subspecies along the way. The silence that followed was deafening. But here's the really interesting part, Maya continued, apparently oblivious to the growing horror in her audience. We didn't do it on purpose. We're not malicious by nature, we're just really good at surviving. And unfortunately for everything else, our definition of survival tends to be pretty expansive. Vextar leaned forward, his amber eyes narrowing. You speak of your species as if it were some kind of plague. Plague is such an ugly word, Maya said thoughtfully. I prefer to think of us as aggressively successful. We're the only species that looked at a planet trying to kill us in every conceivable way, and said, you know what, we're going to kill you right back. She stood up again, and this time all three Krellians visibly tensed. Earth wasn't just a death world, gentlemen. It was a death world with a sense of humor. Ice ages that lasted millennia. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Plagues that killed 90% of the population. Predators that could crush us in their jaws. And what did humans do? Maya paused for dramatic effect. We thrived. We adapted. We overcame. And when we ran out of environmental challenges to conquer, we started making our own. Your own? Zalmoth asked, though he sounded like he didn't really want to know the answer. Wars, Zalmoth. Beautiful, terrible, species-defining wars. We spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other, and you know what we learned. We learned that the only thing more dangerous than a human who wants to survive is a human who wants to protect other humans. The interrogation chamber's lighting seemed to flicker, though that might have been Maya's imagination. We developed something that most predator species never really master, Maya continued, her voice taking on an almost academic tone. Pack bonding. Not just with our immediate family groups, but with complete strangers. Humans will die for people they've never met, just because those people are part of their conceptual pack. Captain Nexrick's scales had shifted to a darker color. Many species have pack instincts, not like ours, Maya said with a shake of her head. Most pack hunters abandon injured members. Natural selection, survival of the fittest, all that. But humans? We carry our wounded. We care for our disabled. We protect our young for decades, not months. And when someone threatens our pack, she let the sentence hang in the air. When someone threatens our pack, Maya repeated softly, we don't just fight back. We eliminate the threat, completely, permanently, with extreme prejudice and usually excessive collateral damage. Vextar's voice was carefully controlled when he spoke. You are suggesting that your species would respond to your capture. Oh, Commander, Maya said, and her smile was brilliant and terrifying. They're not going to respond to my capture, they already are responding. See, the thing about humans in space is that we brought all of our worst habits with us. The persistence hunting, the pack bonding, the cheerful refusal to accept that anything is impossible. She walked over to the chamber's small viewport and looked out at the stars. Research Station Echo 7 wasn't just a research station, gentlemen. It was a monitoring post. And when I didn't check in at my scheduled time, an automatic distress beacon was triggered. That beacon didn't just send out a generic help me signal. Maya turned back to face them, and the expression on her face made all three Krellians take a step backward. That beacon sent out a message that translated roughly to pack member taken. Threat identified. Eliminate with extreme prejudice. The ship's lights flickered again, and this time Maya was sure it wasn't her imagination. The beautiful thing about persistence hunters, Maya said conversationally, is that they always find their prey. Always. It's just a matter of time. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to sound. The alarm wasn't the gentle chime of a minor system malfunction. It was the harsh, bone-deep wail of a ship in mortal danger, and it cut through the interrogation chamber like a plasma cutter through butter. Maya cocked her head to listen. Oh, that's interesting. That sounds like your long-range sensor array detecting multiple incoming contacts. Big ones if I'm reading the pitch correctly. Commander Vextar was already moving, his massive form surprisingly graceful as he activated a wall-mounted communication panel. Bridge, report. The voice that crackled back was tight with barely controlled panic. Commander, we have 15. No, 23 human vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They're maintaining standard formation but, sir, their energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Maya settled back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone whose dinner reservation had just been confirmed. 23? That's actually pretty restrained for a pack response. They must be feeling diplomatic. Impossible, Captain Nexrick snarled, though his scales had gone completely black with stress. No human fleet could have tracked us through hyperspace. We used randomized jump coordinates and electromagnetic dampers. Oh, sweetie, Maya said with genuine sympathy. You're still thinking like ambush predators. Track you? Why would we need to track you when we can just follow you? The communication panel crackled again. Commander, the human fleet is they're not responding to our hails. They've established a sphere formation around our position, and they're just waiting. Zalmoth's datapad clattered to the floor. Waiting for what? Maya examined her fingernails with casual interest. Probably waiting to see if you're smart enough to return me undamaged. Humans are generally reasonable about these things. We prefer diplomacy when it's an option. And if it's not an option? Vextar asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Well then they'll demonstrate why persistence hunters don't need to be particularly fast or strong. They just need to be inevitably overwhelmingly thorough. The lights in the chamber flickered again, And this time Maya could hear the subtle change in the ship's engine harmonics that indicated power being diverted to defensive systems. Bridge. Vextar barked into the communicator. Tactical analysis of the human fleet. Sir, our computers are having difficulty processing their weapon signatures. They appear to be using some kind of adaptive technology that shifts frequency faster than our sensors can compensate. But Commander, the voice paused. Sir, their smallest vessels are reading as Dreadnought class on our threat assessment scale. Maya laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both delighted and absolutely terrifying. Oh, they brought the good ships. That's so sweet. They really do care about me. This is impossible, Captain Nexrick repeated, though he sounded less convinced than before. Humans are a young species. They've barely mastered interstellar travel. Their technology should be centuries behind ours. You know what's funny about that? Maya asked, standing up and walking over to the viewport. You guys have been spacefaring for what? 8,000 years? 9,000? Very impressive. Very traditional. You perfect a technology, you stick with it. You use it for millennia. She pressed her face against the transparent aluminum, looking out at the stars. Humans have been in space for maybe 300 years, and we've gone through approximately 47 major technological revolutions in that time. We don't perfect technology and then stick with it. We perfect it, then immediately start figuring out how to make it obsolete. The communication panel erupted in chatter as reports flooded in from across the Krellian ship. Commander, they're jamming our communications. Sir, something's interfering with our weapon targeting systems. Commander, our hyperspace drive is showing critical malfunctions. Maya turned away from the viewport, and the expression on her face was the look of someone watching a beautifully choreographed performance. The thing about persistence hunters, she said over the growing chaos, is that we don't just chase our prey until it collapses from exhaustion. We learn everything about our prey. We study its habits, its weaknesses, its escape routes. We plan. Vextar was barking orders into multiple communicators now, his composure finally beginning to crack. All weapons to full power. Prepare for defensive maneuvers. Oh, Commander, Maya said sadly. You still don't understand. This isn't a battle. This is an intervention. The ship shuddered, and the lights went out completely for several seconds before emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. What are they doing to us? Zalmoth whispered. Maya looked genuinely thoughtful. If I had to guess, they're probably systematically disabling every system on your ship without actually damaging anything vital. Humans are very good at non-lethal takedowns when we want to be. We've had a lot of practice with each other. Why? Vextar demanded. Why not simply destroy us? Because that would be inefficient. Maya explained patiently. If they just blew you up, your people wouldn't learn anything from the experience. But if they capture your entire hunting fleet without firing a single shot, if they demonstrate that the supposedly mighty Krellian predators are completely helpless against human tactics, she smiled, and it was the smile of someone who understood exactly how psychological warfare worked. Well, that sends a message to every other species in the galaxy about what happens when you mess with human pack members. The ship lurched violently to one side, and Maya could hear the distinctive sound of docking clamps engaging against the hull. Besides, she added conversationally, humans don't really like killing sentients unless we absolutely have to. We prefer to give people the opportunity to learn from their mistakes and make better choices in the future. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the ship's corridors, growing closer by the second. The wonderful thing about being apex predators, Maya said, her voice barely audible over the growing din, is that we can afford to be merciful. We're secure enough in our position at the top of the food chain that we don't need to prove anything to anyone. She paused, listening to the sounds of her people systematically breaching the Krellian ship. But the thing you need to understand, Commander, is that mercy is a choice, and it's a choice we only offer once. The cutting sound stopped. In the sudden silence, Maya could hear the soft whisper of combat boots moving through the ship's corridors with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this sort of thing many times before. I'd recommend surrendering, Maya said helpfully. Humans are generally very reasonable with prisoners of war, assuming those prisoners are reasonable in return. Commander Vextar looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of respect mixed with a healthy dose of terror. What are you? He asked quietly. Maya smiled one last time, and her answer was delivered with the casual confidence of someone stating an obvious fact. We're the species that looked at a universe full of bigger, stronger, more dangerous predators and said, "That's cute. Hold our beer and watch this." The interrogation chamber door exploded inward, and suddenly the room was full of humans. The first thing Maya noticed was that her rescuers weren't wearing the standard-issue military gear she'd expected. Instead, they looked like they'd raided a sporting goods store and a tech convention. Combat boots, cargo pants, and what appeared to be custom-modified equipment that probably violated at least 17 different military regulations. The second thing she noticed was that they moved with the casual efficiency of people who did this sort of thing for fun. Maya, the voice belonged to a tall man with graying temples, and the kind of smile that suggested he'd been looking forward to this exact moment for quite some time. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder. Maya grinned and stood up from her chair. Marcus, I should have known they'd send you. Did you bring the whole family reunion? Just the immediate family and a few close friends, Marcus Rodriguez replied, gesturing casually at the dozen heavily armed humans who had filled the interrogation chamber. We figured 23 ships was probably overkill, but you know how mom gets when someone messes with her babies. The three Krellians were pressed against the far wall, their weapons forgotten, staring at this exchange with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching natural disasters unfold. Wait. Commander Vexter said slowly. Family? Oh, did I forget to mention? Maya asked innocently. Marcus is my older brother. Former military, current head of security for the Outer Colonies Defense Force. He gets a little protective. Marcus looked at the assembled Krellians with the polite interest of someone examining an unusual species of insect. So these are the famous Krellian hunters I've been hearing about. They're smaller than I expected. They're actually quite impressive. Maya said generously. Very traditional hunting methods, beautiful trophy collection, excellent intimidation techniques. They just made one tiny miscalculation. Which was? Zalmoth asked, though he sounded like he was afraid of the answer. They assumed that taking one human wouldn't be a big deal. Marcus replied, his tone conversational. They didn't realize that humans don't really distinguish between one of us and all of us when it comes to family. He walked over to the viewport and looked out at the space surrounding the Krellian ship. See, the thing about pack hunters is that the pack always comes for its members. Always. It's not a choice or a decision we make. It's just what we do. Captain Nexrick found his voice. 23 ships for one human. That seems excessive. Oh, this isn't excessive. Maya said cheerfully. This is restrained. Marcus, how many ships did Mom want to send? The entire Third Fleet, Marcus replied without hesitation. Dad talked her down to a task force. I talked them both down to a family outing. The color drained from Captain Nexrick's scales. The wonderful thing about being human, Maya continued, is that we scale our responses appropriately. You took one of us, so we came for one of us. But we came prepared to take all of you if necessary. Commander Vexter stepped forward, his massive frame still impressive despite the circumstances. What do you want from us? Marcus considered the question. Well, first we want our sister back, obviously. Second, we want you to understand that humans are now off the menu for Krellian hunting expeditions. And third, he paused, looking around the trophy-filled chamber. We want you to spread the word to every other predator species in the galaxy about what happens when you mess with human pack members. And if we refuse? Vexter asked. Maya and Marcus exchanged glances, and Maya shrugged. Then we demonstrate why apex predators don't need to negotiate with lesser predators. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the ship's communication systems crackling to life. Krellian vessel, this is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. You have 60 seconds to release our people and surrender your weapons. This is not a negotiation. Maya looked at her brother with raised eyebrows. Admiral Chen, you brought the Admiral? She insisted. Marcus said with a grin. Something about teaching these overgrown lizards some manners. Commander Vexter looked at his two subordinates, then at the humans surrounding them, then at the space outside where 23 human warships waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. We surrender, he said quietly. Excellent choice, Maya said, clapping her hands together. See? I told you humans were reasonable. As the Krellians were led away by Marcus's team, Vexter paused at the chamber entrance and looked back at Maya. I have one question, he said. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Why the elaborate explanation? Maya's smile was brilliant and slightly terrifying. Because the best way to teach someone about apex predators isn't to tell them what we are. It's to let them figure out what they aren't. She walked past him toward the exit, then paused and looked back. Besides, she added cheerfully, where's the fun in just telling people you're the scariest thing in the galaxy? It's much more entertaining to let them discover it for themselves. As Maya walked through the corridors of the captured Krellian ship, past the trophy rooms and the intimidating decorations, she reflected on the day's events. The Krellians had learned an important lesson about the difference between predators and apex predators, and with any luck, they'd share that lesson with every other species in the galaxy. Because the thing about humans wasn't that they were the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally armed species in the universe. The thing about humans was that they were the species that had looked at a universe full of bigger, stronger, more dangerous creatures, and decided that the universe needed better management. And they'd been right. Maya stepped aboard the human transport ship, and took a deep breath of recycled air that smelled like home. Behind her the Krellian hunting fleet sat disabled and captured, their crew learning firsthand what happened when predators tried to hunt apex predators. It had been, Maya decided, a very educational day for everyone involved, especially the aliens.